Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into something you guys specifically requested. We're talking psychopathy and aggression. Or, well, maybe the disconnection between them. We're cracking open a 1998 paper for this one. It's called Emotion and Aggression in the Psychopathic Personality.
Okay.
And just a heads up, this isn't going to be another one of those all psychopaths or violent criminals conversations.
Right.
This research actually suggests there's a lot more nuance here. Like, we're talking different flavors of aggression depending on what's motivating the person with the psychopathic traits.
Yeah, it's like instead of assuming every apple's rotten, we're going to slice this whole concept open.
Yeah.
Examine the different types. See which ones actually leave a bad taste in your mouth.
Ooh, I like that. I like that analogy a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so to kick things off, I think we need to get on the same page about what psychopathy even means. It's one of those terms that gets tossed around a lot, but it's not as simple as it seems.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the classic view, it's kind of like a caricature almost, right? Someone totally lacking empathy, maybe rocking that deceptively charming persona.
Right.
But the thing is, more recent research has actually added some layers to that, showing us there are these distinct facets to the condition, like almost like two sides of a coin.
Okay, so it's not just about being a smooth talker with a hidden agenda. There's more to it.
Way more. And this is actually where those stereotypes about psychopaths always being violent come into play.
Right.
We have to remember that not every single person with psychopathic traits is out there, committing violent acts.
Right.
And on the flip side, not every aggressive person is a psychopath.
Right. It's like saying anyone who owns a stove is automatically a master chef. Some people, they're more like takeout connoisseurs.
Exactly. And just like with cooking, there's a whole spectrum of aggression, too. It's not always, a fist fight in a dark alley. Sometimes it's much more calculated, more like a means to an end, rather than just a pure emotional outburst.
So aggression with a purpose.
Yeah, you could think of it like that, a tool to try to get what someone wants.
So strategic manipulation versus just like an impulsive outburst. Is that what you mean by like instrumental aggression?
Yeah, you got it. And, that's actually one of the interesting things this research found. So while psychopaths were statistically more prone to violence overall, they were actually less likely to commit murder than non-psychopaths.
Interesting.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, psychopaths were way more likely to use weapons and to engage in assault, often as a way to control the people around them or for, personal gain.
Okay.
Whereas non-psychopaths, they were more likely to be violent in the context of their existing relationships.
So less spontaneous rage, more cold, calculated action.
Yeah.
That really flips the script on that whole psychopath is a ticking time bomb image.
It really does.
It's almost like their aggression is strategic.
Exactly. Like we were saying, it's instrumental. It suggests there's a thought process, a decision being made. They're using aggression as a tool. And that's really important, especially when you think about like criminal profiling and stuff, or even just how we approach treatment for these, for folks who fall on the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes you think about all the ways this instrumental aggression thing might be playing out in like everyday life. I don't know, we often hear about these high-powered CEOs or even politicians who have this really ruthless, almost cutthroat way about them.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder. When you start to see past that Hollywood image of a psychopath and you start to understand this whole calculated aggression thing, it makes you look at those kinds of personalities in a whole new light.
It really does. It's almost like we're talking about two completely different worlds of psychopathy here.
Yeah.
One that's driven by cold calculation and another that's more reactive. And this is where those two facets we were talking about earlier come back into play, right? The emotional detachment versus the antisocial behavior.
Exactly. So with the folks who score high on emotional detachment, they tend to be less fearful, a little more dominant, often very ambitious. They might not shy away from confrontation. In fact, they might even see it as a tool to get what they want.
So their aggression, if and when it shows up, it's less about anger, more about just like moving the chess pieces to their advantage.
Exactly. And then on the other hand, you have the folks who lean more towards that antisocial behavior. And this group, they tend to show higher anxiety, more impulsivity, and what we call reactive aggression. Think of it like more likely to lash out in the heat of the moment.
So two very different expressions of aggression, but potentially stemming from like the same underlying condition. Now, I do want to acknowledge that this particular research was done on incarcerated men.
Right.
So we have to keep that in mind.
Of course, yeah.
But it does make you wonder, if you have someone where these two profiles overlap, they're high in both.
Hmm.
Does that create like a perfect storm situation?
Yeah. That's a really good observation. And yeah, I mean, the research seems to suggest that it might. Someone who's high in both emotional detachment and antisocial behavior, they could be particularly volatile. It's like, imagine if you have that calculated edge, but then you combine it with a hair-trigger temper. That's a potent mix.
That's a little scary, to be honest.
It can be, yeah.
And it actually makes me think about something else that the paper touched on. It was this idea that traditional therapy, the kind that focuses on building empathy,
Yeah.
it might actually backfire with this population,
Interesting.
which seems kind of counterintuitive at first,
Right.
right? Like you would think that would be helpful.
It really does. It's fascinating, isn't it? And it all circles back to that whole instrumental aggression concept. Because if someone is kind of wired to be less fearful, maybe even, they thrive in environments where they have control, imagine if you try to increase their empathy.
I see where you're going with this. It'd be like giving them an even sharper tool, but they already have a whole toolbox full.
Exactly. Instead of it leading to less aggressive behavior, it might actually just make them more adept at, recognizing vulnerabilities in others and then exploiting them.
So not reducing their capacity for aggression, but almost like refining their ability to use it. That's a little chilling when you think about it.
It is. And it just highlights how important it is to really approach this condition with nuance, with a really deep understanding. We can't just assume that what works for one person is going to work for everyone, especially with something as complex as psychopathy.
Yeah, no doubt. This has been a really eye-opening part of this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the traditional methods, they might not be the answer here, especially given how they could actually backfire.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? Like if we're rethinking therapy for certain people who are high in these traits, are there other approaches that might be more promising?
Well, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? And to answer it, we kind of have to keep digging.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at the edge of like a rabbit hole here.
Hmm.
We've challenged the stereotypes. We've explored all these different flavors of aggression. We've even questioned whether traditional therapies are really the right approach.
Mm-hmm.
So like, where do we go from here? If we're rethinking therapy, at least for some people who are very high in these traits, what other approaches could hold promise?
Well, you're right. It's like we flipped the script on this whole condition, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, the next chapter, it's still being written. We need more research. We need to dive deeper into what's really driving these behavioral patterns.
So more of a scalpel than a sledgehammer approach.
Yeah, exactly.
What could that even look like?
Well, for example, there's some really interesting studies out there that are starting to draw these connections between psychopathic traits and actual differences in brain structure and function, particularly in areas that are related to, emotional processing and impulse control.
So like if we can pinpoint those differences early on, could we actually tailor interventions, especially for kids or teenagers?
That's the hope. I mean, we've seen how much promise early identification and intervention has shown in lots of areas of mental health. So imagine if we could identify those at-risk individuals early on and then give them that really targeted support to help them, develop healthier ways to navigate social situations and stuff.
So instead of like resorting to manipulation or aggression, they'd have other tools in their tool belt to get what they need and build relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
But then that brings up another question, right? Like, how do we approach all of this ethically? Because, I mean, imagine like identifying potential traits in kids. That could be so easily misinterpreted or even misused.
Absolutely. You're hitting on a really crucial point there. I mean, ethics are absolutely paramount in any field.
Yeah.
But especially when we're talking about something as sensitive as this, like any screening efforts, any intervention efforts, they have to be grounded in solid science. They have to be completely free of bias. And most importantly, they have to prioritize the well-being of the individual above everything else.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk for sure.
It is.
But it just really highlights why we need to be having these conversations,
Well,
like open and honest conversations. We need to get away from that kind of sensationalized Hollywood image of what a psychopath is.
Right.
And try to foster a more, a more informed, a more nuanced, and honestly, a more compassionate understanding of this whole thing.
100% agree. Knowledge without understanding can be really dangerous.
Yeah.
But when you approach these things with curiosity and a genuine desire to learn, it can lead to much more effective interventions and just a more humane approach overall, I think.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And on that note of informed curiosity, I think we've reached the bottom of this deep dive.
I think so. It's a deep one.
We really unpacked a lot, right? The whole relationship between psychopathy and aggression. We debunked some myths. We even dipped our toes into potential avenues for the future. So I hope this deep dive has given everyone listening a new way to think about this whole topic, because it's a really complex one.
And remember, this is just the starting point, right? The real value of a deep dive is that it just sparks more questions, more curiosity, that desire to keep learning.
Absolutely. And for anyone who wants to explore further, we'll link to the research paper and some other resources in the show notes.
Definitely.
So until next time, keep those questions coming, keep diving deep, and we'll catch you all on the next deep dive.